I never liked stopping at motels. There's always something about them that feels half-finished, half-forgotten, like they were built to hold the weight of a night, but never meant for anyone to stay longer than that. The kind of places that smell faintly of stale smoke no matter how often the carpets are replaced, where the walls seem thin enough to hear the breath of whoever sleeps next door, and where the air itself feels heavy, as though hundreds of restless nights have soaked into the paint. That particular night, though, I had no choice. I had been driving too long, pushing through the emptiness of the highway, past endless stretches of flickering billboards and fields that looked like black oceans under the moon. My eyes were burning from exhaustion, and the road began to blur into a single endless stripe of gray. When I saw the neon sign buzzing in the distance, its letters half dead, spelling out Motel, I pulled in without a second thought. The parking lot was cracked and uneven, weeds pushing through the concrete as though reclaiming what was abandoned. There were only two other cars, both of them coated in dust, as if they hadn't moved in weeks. The silence around me was oppressive, broken only by the faint hum of the flickering sign and the chirping of insects hiding in the overgrowth. I remember standing there for a moment, gripping my keys, telling myself it would only be for one night. Inside the room, everything felt wrong the moment I opened the door. The smell hit me first, something chemical like disinfectant, but not strong enough to hide the deeper odor beneath it. Damp carpet, old fabric, and something else I couldn't name, something sour that lingered in the back of my throat. The curtains were thin and stiff, the kind that rattled against the window when the air conditioner clicked on. The bedding was mismatched, the kind of faded floral pattern that belonged to another decade, and the carpet was worn in dark pathways where countless strangers had walked before me. But what unsettled me most was the television. It was one of those old boxy sets, the kind with buttons worn down from years of pressing, sitting crooked on a cheap wooden stand bolted to the floor. The screen reflected the dull yellow glow of the lamp on the nightstand. I didn't even bother with it. I wasn't there for comfort or entertainment. I just needed a bed and a few hours of sleep before continuing the drive. I remember dropping my bag on the chair, shutting the door behind me, and locking it twice. The room was quiet except for the faint rattle of the air conditioner. I lay down exhausted, the springs of the mattress creaking under my weight, and closed my eyes. It couldn't have been long before the sound started. At first it was just static, soft, almost like a hiss in the background. My half-asleep brain thought it was the AC until I opened my eyes and realized the glow filling the room wasn't from the lamp anymore. The television had turned itself on. The screen blazed with static, a restless sea of black and white specks, the sound low but insistent, like whispers pressed against my ears. I sat up slowly, my heart thudding harder than it should have for something so mundane. Maybe it was on a timer, I thought. Maybe the last guest had left it that way. I stood, the carpet rough beneath my bare feet, and fumbled with the power button until the screen blinked black again. The silence returned. I lay back down, closed my eyes, tried to breathe, and then again the static roared to life. This time the volume was louder, sharp enough to make the lamp on the nightstand hum faintly in response. The shadows in the room shifted with the light of the screen, jagged and restless. I forced myself up again, pressing the button harder, holding it, unplugging the cord completely from the wall. The screen went black, the sound died. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. But even unplugged, the television came back. The screen flickered alive, the glow brighter than before, the static sharper, cutting through the silence like a blade. I could see the reflection of the light on the glossy surface of the table, on the glass of the picture frame hanging crooked on the wall. It wasn't just random noise anymore. The static seemed to pulse, to form shapes that dissolved as quickly as they appeared. Faces, maybe, or the impression of them. It was like staring too long at the grain of wood or the clouds in the sky. Patterns revealing themselves, but only if you dared to keep looking. The room felt colder, though the AC hadn't changed. My skin prickled as if the air itself had teeth. I wanted to leave, but stepping outside felt worse. The idea of the parking lot, empty under that buzzing neon light, the fields beyond swallowing the horizon. I couldn't bring myself to open the door. So I sat there, watched the screen, listened. The hiss of static wasn't uniform anymore. It rose and fell, warbling, almost rhythmic. At times it sounded like words blurred beyond recognition, as though someone was speaking from behind a thick wall, their voice fractured into noise. My chest tightened as I leaned closer, not because I wanted to, but because something in that sound pulled at me. The longer I listened, the more certain I became that it wasn't random. It was deliberate, a message buried inside the chaos. I couldn't make it out, not fully, but I could feel it. A sense of direction in the noise, like the rhythm of a language I didn't understand. The minutes stretched into hours. The clock on the nightstand seemed broken, the red digits frozen in place. Or maybe I had stopped perceiving time altogether. I sat on the edge of the bed, every nerve alert, watching the screen as if something might finally emerge from it. At one point, the static dipped into silence for a fraction of a second. The room went utterly still. In that instant, I felt certain there was someone standing directly behind me. The air pressed heavy against my back, colder than the rest of the room, heavy with presence. I didn't turn. I couldn't. When the static returned, it was louder than ever. The glow filled every corner of the room, pushing the shadows into sharp relief. I pressed my palms against my ears, but it didn't matter. The sound wasn't outside, it was inside. In my skull, in my teeth, vibrating through me. I don't know how long it lasted. The hours blurred into a haze of noise and light. Every time I thought it had stopped, the television flared alive again, as though mocking me for believing I could find silence. Sleep was impossible. My eyes burned from staring. My throat ached from breathing the thick, sour air of the room. When the first hint of dawn bled through the thin curtains, the television finally died. Just like that, the screen went black, the glow gone, the sound swallowed into nothing. The silence that followed was worse than the static. It felt like the room itself was holding its breath, waiting. I didn't wait. I grabbed my bag with shaking hands, not even bothering to check if I'd left anything behind, and stumbled out into the pale morning. The neon sign buzzed faintly above me, insects scattering in the light. My car was cold, coated in dew. I started it with trembling fingers and didn't look back at the room as I pulled out of the lot. Even now, I can still hear it, that low hiss, threading through the quiet whenever I'm alone at night. Sometimes when I close my eyes, I see the flicker of that static glow, like the screen is waiting for me to tune back in. And I wonder if I did more than just spend a night in that room. I wonder if somehow I brought it with me. I've stayed in a lot of motels. Road trips, overnight stops, places where the carpet smells faintly of damp socks and disinfectant that never really did its job. But this particular motel, stuck with me more than any other. Not because of the flickering neon sign outside, not because of the yellowed wallpaper peeling at the corners, but because of something I can still feel if I close my eyes too long at night. Something I can still hear. It was the sound of breathing. Slow, heavy, deliberate. And it was coming from under the bed I was about to sleep in. The night had been uneventful up until then. I had been driving too long, pushing through states I can barely even recall now, until the highway itself felt endless. When I finally pulled off at a lonely exit, the sky was black in a way that made the stars almost dizzying. The sign for the motel buzzed in the dark, a faded red glow humming faintly, casting the parking lot in a sickly light. The building itself was small, squat, and ugly, but at that hour, it didn't matter. All I wanted was a place to collapse. The moment I stepped into the room, the air felt stale, as though it had been sealed for too long, even though I knew it had probably been used just a few hours earlier. The carpet was thin and rough, flattened in the center where countless shoes had ground dirt into it. The bedspread had that familiar pattern of brown swirls and faded flowers, the kind that hides stains rather than decorates. The light fixture above me was too bright, a harsh white that turned everything into sharp edges and yellow shadows. I remember tossing my bag on the dresser and shutting the door behind me, the sound echoing too loud in the silence. That was the first thing I noticed. The silence. Motels usually carry some kind of background noise. TVs in other rooms, a shower running through thin walls, footsteps from the lot. But this one felt sealed, like the night had folded over the building and swallowed it whole. I sat down on the edge of the bed, the springs creaking beneath my weight, and that was when the smell hit me. Not immediately, not strong, but enough to make me wrinkle my nose. It was faint, almost like the sour-sweet smell of damp fabric that had never dried properly. It lingered just under the surface of the room's already stale air, hard to place, but hard to ignore. I told myself it was nothing, that motels always smelled off, that maybe the air conditioner had mildew in it. I turned it on anyway, just to drown the silence with the sound of rattling vents. Hours passed, or maybe only minutes. The night blurred together as I sat in that too-bright room, scrolling through my phone, pretending I wasn't unsettled. At some point, I decided to kill the light and try to sleep. The room fell into shadow, and for the first time I really saw how deep the darkness pooled at the edges of the furniture. The glow from the neon outside pushed through the curtains in weak red lines, cutting across the bedspread like dried veins. I lay down. The mattress was stiff, the pillows lumpy, but the exhaustion in my bones was enough to make me close my eyes anyway. I was just starting to drift when I heard it. A sound. Not from outside, not from the vent, not even from the bathroom where pipes sometimes groan. It was closer, lower. It was the sound of breathing. At first, I thought it was my own, that half-asleep rhythm you barely notice. But no, it was too deliberate, too heavy. It came in slow pulls of air, like someone filling their lungs with care, then letting it out through their mouth. Not a snore, not sleep. It was the sound of someone fully awake, controlling every inhale and exhale. And it was coming from beneath me. I froze. My body stiffened against the mattress, ears straining. I thought maybe I was imagining it, that the silence was so complete it was tricking me. But no, the longer I listened, the clearer it became. Someone was under the bed, and they were breathing. The sound was muffled slightly by the box spring, but not enough to hide the weight of it. It wasn't shallow. It wasn't weak. It was strong. Slow. Like the person was lying flat on their back, staring up at me through the thin layer of fabric and wood, deliberately trying not to move except for their lungs. I didn't move. I couldn't. My arms went numb, my legs heavy, as though my body itself was refusing to acknowledge what was happening. My mind screamed to leap up, to look, to run, but I stayed still, because part of me knew. If I leaned over, if I let my head dip low enough to see, I might see eyes looking back at me. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. The breathing never stopped. Sometimes it slowed, as if whoever was beneath me was holding their breath, listening for me. Sometimes it deepened, and I could almost hear the moisture in their throat. I tried to time my own breaths with theirs, but I couldn't. It was too off, too unnatural. I wanted to tell myself it was nothing, that maybe the air conditioner had some strange mechanical wheeze, or that the pipes beneath the room were shifting. But every instinct screamed otherwise. This was human. This was alive, and it was directly under me. At one point, I shifted just slightly, the mattress squeaking beneath me. The breathing changed. It quickened just for a moment, as though whoever was beneath me had been startled, as though they had been waiting for me to move. That was when I knew for certain. I don't remember how long I lay there, paralyzed. My phone was on the nightstand, just inches away, but even reaching for it felt impossible. Any movement might betray me. I stared at the ceiling, heart pounding, every second a battle to keep still. Eventually, I must have blacked out from exhaustion, because the next thing I knew, the red light of dawn was bleeding through the curtains, and the room was silent again. Too silent. I sat up, every muscle trembling, and forced myself to look. The edge of the bedspread dangled inches from the carpet, still as ever. I leaned down slowly, painfully, bracing for what I might see. The space beneath the bed was empty. Empty, except for the carpet, worn thin and dark in the middle. Empty, except for the faint, sour smell that clung to the fabric. I told myself I had imagined it, that I was overtired, hallucinating, that there had never been anyone there at all. I wanted to believe it. I tried to, but when I checked out, dragging my bag behind me into the daylight, I saw the clerk glance at me strangely. I don't know why. Maybe I looked pale. Maybe I looked like I hadn't slept. Or maybe they knew something about that room. I've stayed in plenty of motels since then, and none of them have ever been comfortable. Because every time I lie down in a strange bed, every time the silence becomes too heavy, I wait. I wait for the sound of breathing. And sometimes in the dark, I swear I still hear it. I don't usually stay in hotels by myself. When I do, it's usually for work. Just another bland chain hotel with beige walls and thin carpets that always smell faintly of cleaning solution mixed with something older, something that feels like it has sunk into the fibers for years. The kind of place that is clean enough to pass inspection but still feels used. I had been on the road all day, crossing through stretches of highway where the only light came from passing headlights and neon signs that flickered for gas stations or diners that hadn't changed since the 70s. By the time I checked in, it was well after midnight. The lobby was empty, the kind of empty that feels unnatural. The fluorescent lights above hummed softly, their glow reflecting off the polished floor tiles. Behind the desk was a young man with heavy eyelids, his expression hollow in a way that suggested this was just another night he would forget. The transaction was short. I was handed a key card and directed to a room on the 3rd floor. The elevator groaned as it pulled me up, the walls of the cab lined with scratched metal panels. My room was at the far end of the hall. That hallway felt wrong the second I stepped into it, too long, too quiet. The carpet muffled my footsteps, and the air smelled faintly of old smoke, the kind that clings to curtains no matter how many times they've been washed. My door was just another in a row of identical doors, the kind with gold-colored numbers screwed into them at a slight angle. When I got inside, I remember the relief of closing the door behind me, hearing the click of the latch and the dull snap of the chain sliding into place. The room itself wasn't much. A queen-sized bed with a blanket too thin for the season, a dresser with a television that looked like it had been mounted decades ago, and a single chair in the corner that was more for decoration than comfort. The curtains were heavy, stiff, and pulled tight against the window. I didn't bother opening them. I didn't want to see the empty parking lot outside, not at that hour. The first thing I noticed was the hum, a low vibration that came from the air conditioning unit, buzzing against the silence. The air smelled faintly metallic, like the vent had been blowing the same recycled air through for years. I tossed my bag onto the dresser, stripped down to a t-shirt, and crawled into bed. The sheets felt cold, almost damp, though I knew they weren't. Just the kind of cold that hotel linens always seem to hold on to. It must have been around 3 in the morning when I woke up. I can't explain why. There wasn't a sound, not at first. Just the sudden awareness of being pulled out of sleep. My eyes adjusted slowly to the darkness, the only light being the soft red glow from the alarm clock on the nightstand. My heart was already beating harder than it should have. It was that primal awareness, that sense that something wasn't right. Then I heard it, the faintest metallic rattle. At first I thought it was part of a dream, something lingering in my half-conscious state. But then it came again, clearer this time. The sound of metal against metal, the handle of my door shifting, slowly, carefully, as if someone outside was testing it. My body froze. My breath caught in my chest. I stared at the outline of the door across the room, that thin frame of shadow against the wall. The handle moved again. This time I heard it press down. A faint squeak, the sound of pressure being applied but stopped short by the lock. Someone was trying to open my door. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just lay there, eyes wide in the dark, listening. The sound came again, softer this time. A slow, deliberate push against the handle, followed by silence. Then another attempt. Whoever it was, they weren't knocking, they weren't announcing themselves. They were just trying. The seconds stretched out unbearably long. My mind raced. I thought about the chain lock, thin and fragile. I thought about the bolt, wondering how strong it really was against force. I thought about the hollow hallway outside, how empty it had felt, how no one would hear if something happened in this room. The handle stopped moving. Silence pressed in again, but it wasn't relief, it was worse. Because silence meant waiting. It meant whoever was outside was still there. I strained my ears, desperate for anything. A shuffle, a breath, the sound of footsteps retreating. But there was nothing, just the faint hum of the air conditioning and the pounding of my own heart. Minutes passed, or maybe it was seconds. Time didn't move right in that moment. I thought maybe they had left. Maybe it was just some drunk guest who had the wrong room. I almost convinced myself of it, until I heard it again. This time it wasn't the handle. It was the faint scrape of metal against the lock. Like a key, or something trying to mimic one. A thin, sharp sound, deliberate and slow. Someone was trying to unlock my door. My mouth went dry. Every muscle in my body tensed, waiting for the sound of the latch giving way. I didn't dare move. I didn't dare reach for my phone. The thought of even shifting in bed, of making the slightest noise, felt dangerous. As if the person on the other side would hear, would know, and would press harder. The scraping stopped. Another silence. Then the handle pressed down again, firmer this time. The chain lock rattled faintly against the frame, holding. And then stillness. I lay there for what felt like an eternity, watching that door, waiting for the inevitable sound of it breaking. My ears burned with the strain of listening. My chest ached from holding my breath. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to move, to do something, but fear pinned me down. Finally, I heard it. Not footsteps retreating down the hall. Not the sound of a door closing somewhere else. Just the faintest, almost imperceptible exhale. A breath, right on the other side of my door. That was the worst part, because it wasn't rushed. It wasn't panicked. It was calm, patient, as if whoever was there knew I was awake. As if they were waiting for me too. The breath faded, and after that, nothing. No retreating steps. No sounds of departure. Just silence, so thick it pressed against the walls of the room. I didn't sleep again that night. I didn't move until the first light of dawn began to leak through the edges of the curtains, painting the room in the weakest shade of gray. When I finally got up, my legs were stiff, my body aching from hours of tension. I crept to the door, hand shaking as I reached for the handle. The chain was still in place. The bolt was still turned. Slowly, I opened it, just enough to peer into the hallway. Empty. The long, dull carpet stretched out in both directions, the fluorescent lights buzzing faintly above. No sound. No movement, but there was something. On the metal of the lock, faint scratches. Fresh ones, shallow but unmistakable. I closed the door again, this time pushing the bolt so hard it rattled. I didn't bother with the shower. I didn't bother with breakfast. I packed my bag and left. At the front desk, the young man was still there, his eyes hollow as before. He didn't look surprised when I handed over my key. He didn't ask how my night was. He didn't say anything at all. I stepped outside into the cold morning air, the parking lot bathed in pale gray light. My car felt like the only safe place left. As I drove away, the hotel shrinking in my rearview mirror, I couldn't shake the thought. Whoever it was, they weren't confused. They weren't at the wrong door. They were waiting, and they knew I was inside. I checked into that motel because I didn't have much of a choice. The highway had gone on for hours, nothing but stretches of black asphalt, and the occasional pair of headlights sliding past in the opposite direction. By the time I saw the flickering neon sign, half the letters burned out, buzzing faintly in the cold night air, I was too tired to keep driving. My eyes felt like sandpaper, my body like it was made of stone. The office smelled of old coffee and mildew. The carpet was worn down to the threads, and the man at the desk hardly lifted his head when I slid the payment across the counter. He pushed a room key toward me, an actual brass key on a cracked plastic fob. The number was faded, but I could just make out 12. The room wasn't much better. Stale cigarette smoke clung to the curtains, the kind that never really goes away no matter how many years pass. The air conditioner rattled in the corner, coughing out a draft that smelled faintly metallic. The bedspread was stiff, patterned with strange geometric shapes that looked like stains someone had tried to disguise. The kind of place where silence doesn't feel like peace. It feels like something holding its breath. I dropped my bag, sat on the edge of the bed, and let the exhaustion sink into me. There was a nightstand, scratched and warped from water rings, and on top of it sat the motel phone. A pale beige rotary-style thing, the kind I hadn't seen in years. The cord was twisted, stretched thin in places, the kind of relic that shouldn't have been working anymore. Still, I thought nothing of it at the time. It wasn't until I shut off the light, the room dimly lit only by the blinking red numbers of the alarm clock, that the phone rang. The sound startled me, sharp in the dead quiet. That shrill metallic trill, it didn't belong to the room. It cut through the air like a blade. I sat up, blinking, staring at the phone as it rattled against the wood. I didn't answer it at first. I thought maybe it was the front desk, but I hadn't asked for a wake-up call, and the man behind the counter didn't look like the type to bother with courtesy. Still, the phone rang again. And again, relentless, each chime echoing against the walls of that cramped little room. When I finally picked it up, the receiver felt sticky, coated with something that left an unpleasant film on my hand. I pressed it against my ear. There was nothing, not even static. No hum, no crackle of a line. Just dead, heavy silence. I listened longer than I should have, almost waiting for something to emerge from the void. But there was only the sound of my own breathing, muffled, echoing back faintly, as if the line wasn't completely dead, like it was feeding me back to myself. I hung up. I lay back down, but sleep didn't come. The silence afterward was heavier than before, as though the ringing had left something behind in the air. The room smelled sharper, like dust disturbed, or the faint coppery tang of rust. My skin prickled, the kind of unease that crawls over you when you realize you've just invited something you don't understand. An hour must have passed before the phone rang again. This time, I didn't hesitate. I picked it up on the first ring. Again, nothing. Just my own shallow breathing pressed back into my ear. I whispered into the receiver, testing, but all I got was that faint, hollow echo. When I hung up, I noticed something that chilled me. The cord. When I first walked in, the cord had been twisted, knotted, stretched thin. But now it was perfectly smooth, untangled, as though someone had been carefully straightening it while I wasn't looking. I told myself I was overtired. The mind plays tricks when it's running on empty. But there was no way to explain away what happened next. The phone kept ringing. Not once, not twice, but dozens of times throughout the night. Sometimes minutes apart, sometimes an hour. Always when I felt myself slipping into sleep, pulling me back to wakefulness. Always the same when I answered, silence, then that faint echo of my own breath. But each time, the silence lingered longer, and the echo grew sharper, louder, almost detached, like I wasn't listening to myself anymore. Like there was another breath, layered over mine, breathing with me. I tried to unplug the phone, but the cord didn't lead to the wall. It just disappeared into the nightstand, vanishing into the wood as if it had grown from it. I pulled hard, yanking until my hands ached, but it wouldn't come loose. It was fixed there, permanent, part of the room. By 3 a.m., the sound of the ring had changed. At first shrill, mechanical, familiar, but then deeper, resonant, vibrating through the floor, through my chest. The walls seemed to tremble with each note. When I picked it up this time, I didn't hear silence. I heard breathing. Not my own. Slow, wet, uneven. Too close. Right against the other end of the line. I held the receiver away from my ear, but the sound didn't fade. It filled the room. I could feel it brushing against my neck, as though the air itself had shifted. I dropped the phone. It swung on its cord, thudding softly against the nightstand, but the breathing continued. Louder, more ragged, as though the mouth on the other end was opening wider. I pressed myself back against the wall, heart pounding, waiting for it to stop. But it didn't stop. The breathing blended with something else, tiny movements, faint scraping, the sound of weight shifting against carpet. Not from the phone anymore, but from under the bed. I didn't look. I couldn't. I sat frozen, eyes fixed on the pulsing red glow of the alarm clock numbers. 3:27, 3:28, 3:29. Each minute stretched, the sound of the breathing never once faltering. The phone rang again, even though the receiver was dangling. A piercing cry, cutting through the thick sound of breath. I wanted to smash it, to rip it from the wall, but I couldn't bring myself to move closer. I stayed like that until dawn seeped in through the thin curtains. The breathing stopped only when the first pale light touched the floor. The phone went silent, receiver swaying gently like a pendulum. When I finally forced myself to look under the bed, there was nothing. Just dust, discarded wrappers, the usual trash of forgotten travelers. But the carpet smelled damp, like someone had been lying there all night. I left the motel without checking out. I didn't take the key back. I didn't look at the clerk. I just drove, and when I passed the sign in the daylight, I realized the name of the motel wasn't even legible anymore. Just faded letters, cracked plastic, the shadow of something that once was. But even now, on nights when I try to sleep, I sometimes hear it again. That shrill, piercing ring. And when I pick up my cell phone, when I press it to my ear, I swear, just faintly, I can hear that same breath waiting for me. I didn't take her seriously at first. She was just a tired old housekeeper, hunched over her cart in the narrow motel hallway, her hands stiff from years of scrubbing the same carpets and changing the same bedsheets. Her eyes, though, had this heaviness in them, something that didn't belong to simple exhaustion. She glanced up at me as I passed, as though she had been waiting for me. And then, in a hushed, trembling tone, she told me something I couldn't shake. She told me never to stay in that room. I laughed it off inside my head, the way you do when an old stranger mumbles something cryptic. But the way she looked at me, it was like her eyes were reaching through me, like she wasn't warning me out of courtesy, but out of fear. She didn't point. She didn't need to. I somehow knew exactly which door she meant. The number on it was faded, like it had been touched too many times. The brass plate looked dull compared to the others on the row. The wood was warped, water-stained, and the peephole was cracked, like a spider's web frozen in glass. I felt my stomach sink as I walked past, dragging my bag behind me, pretending not to feel the weight of her gaze. My assigned room wasn't far from it. A few doors down, the same worn carpet running beneath my shoes, the same hum of flickering fluorescent lights above. The motel smelled faintly of mildew and detergent, the kind of place that seemed clean only because it was constantly being scrubbed, not because it truly was. I told myself the housekeeper was just being dramatic. Old buildings have old stories. Rooms get reputations. Maybe someone had died in there, or maybe someone had simply complained about bad luck. But the truth was, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Her warning clung to me like static electricity, impossible to shake. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't sleep. The hum of the heater was too loud. The mattress sagged in the middle. The curtains barely blocked out the orange glow of the streetlight outside. And yet none of those were what kept me awake. It was the silence that pressed against the walls. The silence that seemed heavier than silence should be, as though the whole building was holding its breath. And then, as if on cue, I heard it. A sound that didn't belong to my room. Not footsteps in the hall. Not voices from outside. This was different. A dragging. A scraping. Like furniture being pulled slowly across a floor. It came from behind the wall that connected my room to the one the housekeeper had warned me about. I lay there, frozen, listening to it. The scrape would pause, then start again, steady, deliberate, like someone rearranging heavy furniture in the middle of the night. Every time it stopped, I thought it was over. But then it resumed, closer, heavier, as though it was inching its way toward me. I wanted to tell myself someone had checked in there after all. But when I'd passed it earlier, I had noticed the lock plate hanging loose, as if the door hadn't been opened in years. The longer I listened, the more I noticed other sounds too. A faint creak, like weight shifting on old boards. A low thud, muffled, as if something had been dropped. And then soft, rhythmic taps. Not random, almost like fingers brushing against the wall. My skin prickled with goosebumps, and I pulled the blanket tighter around me, even though the room felt unbearably warm. The air had taken on this strange density, heavy and humid, carrying with it a faint smell. Something sour, metallic, like rusted pipes or old blood. I shut my eyes, telling myself it was my imagination. But when I opened them again, I noticed the shadows in the room had changed. The corner by the wardrobe seemed darker than before, the kind of dark that swallows light instead of resisting it. My eyes kept flicking back to it, expecting to see movement. At some point, exhaustion must have pulled me under. But my sleep was shallow, filled with restless dreams of corridors that never ended, of doors with no handles, of whispers just out of reach. I woke to silence again, but it wasn't normal silence. It was oppressive, the kind that makes your ears ring. I could feel it pressing down on me, the way deep water presses on your chest. I turned my head toward the wall, the one connecting to that room. The air near it seemed colder, as though the wall itself was radiating a chill. Then came the knock. Not loud, not frantic, just a single hollow knock, low and deliberate, right where my bed pressed against the wall. I stopped breathing, my entire body locked in place. I waited, every second stretching like it would never end. And then another knock. Same rhythm, same spot. I wanted to move, to get up, to leave, to do anything but stay there. But I couldn't. My body refused to listen. My mind kept circling back to the housekeeper's words. Don't stay in that room. She hadn't said why. She hadn't explained. But I understood now, in the way you understand something with your bones rather than your brain. Eventually, the knocking stopped. But the silence that followed was worse. It wasn't empty, it was watchful. Like something was waiting on the other side, patient, deliberate, unwilling to leave. I don't remember falling asleep again. But when I woke in the morning, the smell was still there, stronger even. And on the wall, faint but visible in the dim morning light, were small smudges. Dark, finger-shaped, pressed into the paint. I didn't stay another night. I packed my things without showering, without eating, without even looking back at the bed. As I dragged my bag down the hall, I passed the housekeeper again. She didn't say anything this time. She just watched me with that same heavy look, as though she already knew what I had heard. I thought about asking her what happened in that room, but I didn't. Some things don't need to be explained. Some things are better left with the silence that clings to them. And yet, even now, sometimes when I'm lying awake in a strange place, listening to the silence, I hear it again in my memory. That slow scrape, that deliberate knock, that feeling of being watched through the wall. And I know the housekeeper was right. I should never have stayed in that room, not even near it. The motel wasn't on any map I usually trusted. It wasn't listed in any of the road trip apps I had, and yet, when the night stretched too long, and the highway seemed endless, the flickering neon sign caught my attention. It was shaped like a bent arrow, red and half dead, buzzing faintly against the backdrop of the dark sky. Vacancy. That single word kept pulsing, as if beckoning me to pull over. I told myself it was exhaustion that pushed me to take the exit, but deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that the place was waiting for me. The air grew heavier the moment I left the interstate. The asphalt turned into a cracked driveway lined with weeds, and when I finally pulled up, the motel revealed itself in fragments through the fogged windows of my car. A squat, aging building with peeling paint and windows that reflected no light, as though the rooms were hollow behind the glass. The parking lot was empty, except for one car shoved into the farthest corner, its hood dusted with grime, as if it hadn't moved in months. Inside, the reception smelled faintly of mildew and stale cigarettes. The desk was chipped, the bell tarnished, and when my hand brushed against the wooden counter, it left a faint film of dust on my skin. A key slid across the surface, its tag smudged from years of handling. Room 6. I slipped it into my pocket and tried not to think about how cold the brass felt, as if it had been sitting in ice. The door to my room groaned open reluctantly, as though the hinges resented the disturbance. A single bulb cast a jaundiced glow from the ceiling, throwing shadows across faded wallpaper. The air carried a strange, metallic tang, like pennies left too long in a damp pocket. The carpet was thin, stained in places, but I forced myself not to look too closely. I dropped my bag on the bed, its mattress sagging in the middle, and sat down, listening to the springs wheeze under my weight. Silence pressed in on me. It wasn't the comforting kind of silence that comes when you're away from the city, but a stifling quiet that seemed almost staged, as if the building itself were holding its breath. My ears strained for any sound, pipes groaning, a door slamming, a television from another room. But all I heard was the faint buzz of the light above me, uneven and restless. The carpet became difficult to ignore. Something about it kept catching my eyes. Near the edge of the bed, the fibers were darker, the color muted compared to the rest of the floor. At first, I thought it was just a shadow cast from the bed frame, but when I moved, the patch stayed the same. My foot brushed against it, and I felt the slightest resistance, like the carpet was stiffer there, hardened beneath years of use or neglect. Curiosity has a way of gnawing at you in places like this. I told myself to leave it alone, but every second I spent in that room made me aware of the oddness beneath my feet. The air seemed thicker over that spot, the smell sharper. I crouched down and ran my hand over the fibers. They felt brittle, uneven, and in some places, they clung together in stiff clumps. When I pressed harder, the faint outline of something beneath the surface revealed itself. The carpet had been laid imperfectly here. I could see the slightest bulge in the weave, just enough to betray that something had been soaked into it long ago. My nails scraped at the edge, lifting the fabric slightly. What stared back at me was darker, and the smell hit me harder now. Iron. Damp, metallic iron, though the carpet itself was dry. Blood. The thought crawled into my head uninvited, and once it was there, I couldn't chase it out. I yanked my hand back, staring at the patch as if it would shift under my gaze. Nothing happened, yet my skin crawled. My imagination began working against me. Images of someone bleeding out on that very spot, the carpet swallowing their last breath, the floor beneath drinking it all in. I tried to tell myself it was just a stain from something mundane. Wine, rust, even coffee, anything but what my senses screamed. But every detail contradicted that hope. The smell was too specific, too thick, too sharp. I sat back on the bed, rubbing my palms against my jeans, as if I could scrub away the residue that lingered on my skin. The room didn't feel the same after that. The walls seemed closer, the air heavier. I noticed more stains, subtle, blending into the wallpaper, hidden in the corners where light couldn't quite reach. The ceiling bore faint discolorations like water damage, but what kind of water left behind patterns shaped like spreading fingers? Sleep was impossible. I left the light on, curling beneath the thin motel blanket, though its rough fabric scratched at my skin. Every sound, or rather, the absence of sound, kept me awake. My eyes traced the dark patch on the carpet until it blurred, until it became something else entirely. I imagined it spreading, inching outward, filling the room with a creeping red that only I could see. At some point, my exhaustion betrayed me, pulling me into a shallow, restless sleep. But even there, the carpet followed me. My dreams were steeped in it, soaked in that metallic tang, in the image of hands clawing against the floor, of mouths opening wide in silent screams as they were dragged beneath the fibers. The carpet wasn't just covering something, it was keeping something contained, hidden, muffled. I woke with my heart pounding, the sheets damp against my skin. The smell was stronger now, unmistakable, clinging to the air as though something had been disturbed in the night. The patch looked darker than before, and when I leaned closer, I swore I could see moisture glistening between the fibers, faint but fresh. I jerked back, ball rising in my throat. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, to get out, to run back to my car and never look back. But the strange pull of morbid curiosity held me there a little longer. Against my better judgment, I peeled back more of the carpet. The floorboards beneath were warped and stained, the wood dark and cracked, as if it had soaked in something that never dried. My hand trembled as I traced the grooves, each one sticky despite the years that must have passed. And then I noticed it, the faint outline of something carved into the wood. Not letters, not words, but scratches. Long, uneven gouges, as if fingernails had raked against it in desperation. They trailed off in jagged lines, some ending abruptly, others curling into chaotic patterns. It wasn't just blood. It was struggle. It was panic, despair, final moments carved into the very bones of the room. The longer I stared, the more the silence pressed in, heavy and suffocating. The buzzing bulb above flickered violently, and for a split second, I thought I saw the carpet shift on its own, fibers twitching as though something writhed beneath. I stumbled backward, my legs unsteady, my chest tightening with a panic that refused to be reasoned away. I didn't touch my bag. I didn't bother with the key. I just left. The door slammed shut behind me, echoing down the empty hallway. My footsteps rang hollow against the cracked pavement as I rushed back to my car, refusing to look at the windows in case something was looking back. When the engine roared to life, relief should have come, but it didn't. The smell lingered, clinging to me, embedded in my skin. I drove until the motel disappeared from the rearview mirror, until the neon glow was swallowed by the night. Still, the memory stayed, festering, gnawing. Because now I know what lies beneath carpets, what secrets can be pressed down, hidden from the casual glance. I know the feel of wood that has absorbed human desperation, the stench of a room that has seen too much and chosen silence over confession. And sometimes, when I close my eyes, I swear I hear it still. The faintest sound of nails dragging against wood, muffled by layers of carpet, trapped forever beneath the floor. I have stayed in countless motel rooms before, but there was something about that particular night that still crawls beneath my skin, a sensation that has never truly left me. It wasn't the kind of unease you feel when a room is dirty or when the walls are too thin and you can hear strangers coughing through them. No, this was something deeper, something I could feel pressing into my bones as soon as I turned the key and stepped inside. The smell was the first thing that reached me. It wasn't the mustiness of old fabric or the faint odor of cigarettes that lingered in many roadside motels. It was heavier, almost metallic, with a damp undertone, as though the carpet had been soaking in moisture that never fully dried. The light from the small overhead bulb flickered when I flipped the switch, humming faintly before settling into a dull, uneven glow that left the corners of the room swallowed in shadow. That corner, the farthest one, directly across from the bed. Even when I first walked in, before setting down my bag, I noticed how unusually dark it seemed. The shadows pooled thicker there, darker than anywhere else, as if the weak light refused to penetrate that section of the room. My eyes lingered there longer than they should have, adjusting, searching, but all I could make out was a vague mass of darkness. I convinced myself it was nothing more than poor lighting, a trick of the bulb straining against its old wiring. The carpet was stiff beneath my shoes as I walked further inside. It crunched faintly in some places, like grains of sand trapped within the fibers. I told myself I'd only be here one night. A few hours of sleep, and I'd be gone. The room wasn't comfortable, but it was serviceable. The bedspread had that patterned design that countless other motels seemed to use. Geometric shapes in faded reds and browns, fabric worn thin and rough beneath my hand. I unpacked slowly, more out of routine than necessity, and every so often, I found my eyes drifting back toward that corner. My stomach tightened each time I looked. The shadows didn't move, but they felt different, too present. It was like staring into a place where the air itself was denser, thicker, as though something were standing there, just barely beyond recognition. The heater rattled when I turned it on, filling the room with a low drone. It should have been comforting, a wall of noise to mask the silence, but the sound only made the room feel smaller, like it was pressing me inward. I turned on the small lamp by the bed, hoping the extra light would cut through that corner, but it didn't. If anything, it seemed to make the contrast sharper. Every other part of the room lit up in a dull yellow glow, while that section of shadow only seemed to cling harder, like tar refusing to loosen. I tried to tell myself I was being irrational, that I'd been driving too long and exhaustion was twisting the edges of reality. But when I finally sat on the bed, the springs groaning beneath my weight, I realized I wasn't just imagining unease. I felt it, in my chest, in my throat, the sensation that eyes were on me, watching, waiting. The hours passed slowly. I lay down, pulling the blanket over myself, but my gaze wouldn't leave that corner. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt it more strongly, that if I turned my back, something would move. I shifted, flipped, tried to bury my head beneath the pillow, but the air seemed to thicken when I looked away. The room was too quiet, unnaturally so, except for the faint ticking of the clock and the occasional hiss of the heater. And then I noticed it, the shape. It wasn't just shadows anymore. At some point, whether minutes or hours into the night, I realized there was an outline. Subtle but undeniable. A tall figure, standing perfectly still, melded with the dark. At first, I thought it was just the chair pushed against the wall, but no. The chair was closer to the window, not in that corner. This was something else. The more I stared, the clearer the shape became, the darker it seemed compared to everything else around it. My mouth had gone dry. I tried to reason with myself, tried to find logic, but no matter how I shifted my head, no matter how long I blinked, the figure remained. Its presence felt heavy, suffocating. It didn't sway or breathe, didn't falter like a shadow should. It just stood there. I thought about turning on the television, but the thought of the flickering screen, the noise, the way the light would dance around the room, it felt like it would only make things worse. Instead, I lay frozen, my eyes locked on that corner, unable to break the connection. The hours dragged. I didn't sleep. Not once. My muscles ached from staying rigid. My eyes burned from refusing to close. Each time the heater clicked, each time the pipes groaned within the walls, I felt myself flinch, waiting for movement. But the figure never moved. It didn't step forward, didn't retreat. It stood, endlessly patient, as though it knew I wouldn't dare cross the room, as though it fed on the tension winding tighter in my chest. The longer I stared, the more certain I became that it wasn't just an absence of light. It was something else, something that had chosen that corner long before I arrived. By the time the pale gray of morning seeped through the thin curtains, my body was trembling. The figure had not shifted, not once, but when the daylight grew stronger, bleeding into every crevice of the room, I saw it fade. Not like smoke dispersing, not like a trick of the light resolving itself, but like something retreating, pulling itself back into that deeper layer of shadow where I could no longer follow. The corner was empty again. Just a wall. Just stained wallpaper peeling at the edges. Just an ordinary room. But I knew what I had seen, what I had felt, and as I gathered my things with shaking hands and hurried out into the morning air, I didn't dare look back. Because a part of me knew, if I gave that corner one more glance, I might still see it standing there, waiting. And maybe it still does. The first thing I noticed about the motel bathroom wasn't the smell, though that came soon enough. It was the sound. A faint, low hum, almost mechanical, like air being pushed through a tired old system that hadn't been maintained in years. The vent above the shower rattled in uneven rhythms, as if something behind it was loose, vibrating against the thin metal frame. I stared up at it while unpacking my toiletries, telling myself it was just the fan, nothing unusual. Motels were cheap, everything about them was cheap, and noise like that was expected. But then came the smell. Not strong, at least not at first, but sour, like damp drywall that had never properly dried, mixed with something faintly metallic, like old pennies rubbed between wet fingers. It seeped down in bursts, carried by that rattling fan. It reminded me of basements left to rot, the kind of staleness that clings to clothing no matter how many times you wash it. I should have ignored it. I should have shut the bathroom door and told myself that this was the price of staying somewhere for $40 a night. But I didn't. Instead, I stood there, fixated on the vent. watching it tremble ever so slightly against the ceiling with each groan of the fan. The metal slats cast thin shadows across the pale tiles, jagged little stripes that shifted as the light bulb above flickered faintly. By the time I turned on the shower, steam was already fogging up the edges of the mirror. The water was lukewarm, barely tolerable, and smelled faintly of rust. Still, I stayed under it longer than I should have, trying to wash away the feeling of grime that seemed to cling to this place the moment I walked in. My eyes drifted upward again, as they had been doing since I stepped foot inside that bathroom. That vent, that constant hum, the occasional squeak of something moving inside. At first, I told myself it was rats, or maybe cockroaches, some kind of infestation tucked behind the walls, chewing, nesting. But then the movement changed. It wasn't the scattered scrabble of small animals. It was deliberate. A single scrape, then stillness. A sound that stopped the moment I tilted my head to listen closer. I squinted through the mist, staring hard at the vent. And that's when I saw it. At first it was just darkness, a little deeper than the shadows cast by the slats. A space that looked like nothing more than the absence of light. But as the steam shifted and the air pulsed, I realized the dark patch had shape. A curve, the rounded outline of something not supposed to be there. My heart started pounding, and I stood frozen with water trickling down my face, every sense straining to confirm what my brain didn't want to accept. It was an eye, perfectly still, barely glistening in the dim light, but unmistakable. The unmistakable sheen of a human eye, wide open, fixed on me. The world seemed to collapse in around me. The rushing water became a dull roar. My skin prickled with goosebumps beneath the lukewarm stream. For a long moment, I didn't move. I couldn't. That I didn't blink, didn't twitch, didn't falter. It just stared. I stumbled back against the cold tile, slipping slightly on the slick floor, trying to push myself as far from the ceiling as I could. The shower curtain clung to my arm like damp plastic skin, wrapping around me as I scrambled to grab it. All the while, the vent rattled above, and that single I watched. I turned off the water, my hand trembling on the knob. The silence that followed was unbearable. Without the water rushing, every little sound was amplified. The faint drip of condensation falling from the vent. The whir of the fan groaning unevenly. And beneath it, I swore I heard the quietest exhale like breath being pulled through clenched teeth. I backed out of the bathroom without taking my eyes off the ceiling, the wet floor squeaking beneath my feet. When I reached the doorway, I slammed the door shut, heart racing, pulse hammering in my ears. My clothes were still in my bag on the bed. I was dripping wet, standing in that dim motel room with its stained carpet and humming refrigerator. But all I could think of was that eye. That silent, unblinking eye peering at me from behind the vent. I sat on the edge of the bed for what felt like hours, wrapped in the thin blanket from my bag, shivering, not from cold but from something deeper. The thought of going back into that bathroom felt impossible. But I knew I had to. My belongings were still in there. My toothbrush, my razor, the bag with my toiletries, even my phone charger. When I finally worked up the nerve, I approached the door slowly, pressing my ear against the wood. Nothing. No movement, no scrape, no sound of breath. I pushed it open just enough to peek inside. The steam had thinned, and the mirror was streaked with cloudy rivulets, like something had dragged fingers through the condensation. The vent was silent now. The shadows had shifted, but I knew what I had seen. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the corner of the room with every light turned on, staring at the bathroom door. Each time the pipes groaned in the walls, I jumped. Each time the fridge rattled, my chest tightened. At one point, I thought I heard the faint creak of metal from above, like the vent cover being shifted, but I didn't dare check. When the sun finally rose, spilling pale light through the dusty blinds, I gathered my things as quickly as I could. I left most of the toiletries behind. I didn't care anymore. I only wanted to leave. The bathroom door stayed shut. I didn't even glance at it on my way out. But here's the thing. When I returned the key to the front desk, I asked casually, or at least I tried to make it sound that way, if anyone had ever mentioned problems with the bathroom vents. The clerk, an older man with deep-set eyes, froze for just a second too long before forcing a smile and shaking his head. He told me no, nothing like that. Maybe I was imagining it. But I saw it. I know what I saw. That night, someone was in the walls. Watching. Waiting. Hidden just out of reach, breathing the same air I was breathing. I saw the glint of their eye, staring down at me as I stood vulnerable beneath the spray of the shower. And I will never forget it. I've stayed in enough motels across the country to know that there's always a story hidden in the walls. The flicker of a buzzing light over a parking lot, the peeling paint around a doorframe, the faint odor clinging to the carpet. It all speaks of things that happened before you arrived, things the staff doesn't talk about, things guests leave behind. But there was one motel that carried a weight heavier than all the others. I only meant to stay one night. Just a quick stopover on a road that stretched longer than it should have. My eyes burned from driving, my back ached from the hours behind the wheel, and the glowing neon sign by the road looked like salvation. The letters didn't all work. Only half of the word motel pulsed red against the darkness. The office reeked of stale coffee and floor cleaner. The clerk barely looked at me as I scribbled my name into the registry. His hands moved with the kind of mechanical rhythm you see in someone who's been doing the same task for decades. The key slid across the counter. No words of welcome, no small talk, just the hollow scrape of metal against wood. I made my way down the walkway, passing doors that all looked the same, though each seemed to hum with its own quiet presence. My room was near the end, far from the parking lot lights. The key turned stiffly, and the door opened into a space that smelled of dust, faint mildew, and something metallic that I couldn't place. The room was ordinary at first glance. Bedspread patterned with faded flowers, a nightstand with a lamp that gave off a weak yellow glow, curtains too thin to keep out the light from the lot. But the air felt disturbed, like someone had been inside not long before me. The sheets were smoothed, the pillows in place, but there was a depression in the mattress, as if a weight had only recently risen from it. I brushed it off. Sleep was all I wanted. I set my bag down, clicked off the light, and let the hum of the old air conditioner fill the silence. But silence doesn't always stay silent. Sometimes it rearranges itself into sounds you don't expect. It started with a shuffle, light, hesitant, against the carpet outside my door. I froze, ears straining, heart ticking slower than it should. The sound paused, then moved again, brushing past, fading into the distance. I told myself it was another guest. But the way the steps dragged, the way they lingered just outside, it gnawed at me. Still, exhaustion dulled the edges of fear, and eventually I drifted off. When I woke, it wasn't to sunlight. It was to a knock. Not the hard, insistent knock of someone at your door. This was softer, from inside the room. The sound came from the closet door. 3 faint taps, then stillness. I couldn't move at first. My throat was dry, my hands damp with sweat. Finally, I forced myself to get up, each step toward the closet heavier than the last. I reached for the handle, half expecting resistance, half hoping it would be locked. It wasn't. The door creaked open to reveal emptiness. Just a bare rod for hangers and shadows pooling at the base. No one there, but the air smelled wrong, like damp clothing that had been packed away for too long, mixed with something sour, something like old iron. I shut it quickly and told myself to forget it, but you can't forget the things you feel pressing against you in the dark. The next morning, the motel looked the same in daylight, but I felt as though the building itself was staring at me. The clerk's eyes followed me too long when I dropped off the key. He said nothing, only slid the registry back toward him. That's when I saw it. My name, written where I had signed the night before. But directly above it, a line had been drawn through another name. A guest who had checked in the day before me. The date was there. The time was there. But where the signature should have been, there was nothing but a jagged black line. And yet, next to it, in the neat handwriting of the clerk, was a note, checked out. The thing that unsettled me most was the detail at the far end of the page. Checked out, room never occupied. The words repeated in my head as I walked out into the sunlight, into the noise of the road, into the ordinary world again. The guest who had checked in, but never stayed. The guest who had left without ever entering. And as I think back, I remember the weight on the bed when I first opened my door. The air, heavy with the smell of something metallic. The knock from inside the closet. Someone had been there. Not in the way you expect a guest to be, with luggage and belongings, but in the way that lingers, in the way that checks out without ever checking in. The room hadn't been empty when I slept there. It still isn't, because sometimes the walls of a motel hold on to more than just stories. Sometimes they hold on to guests who never really leave. I don't think most people notice the sounds that bleed through walls. The muted thumps, the faint dragging, the subtle rhythm of someone breathing just beyond the plaster. Most of us live with it. Neighbors in apartments, guests in motels, travelers stacked above and below each other. Noise is expected. But when you've been told a room is empty, and you still hear those sounds, when you know there should be no one there, that's when every creak and shuffle starts to take on a weight you can't ignore. I stayed in that motel off the highway because it was cheap. Nothing more. I was tired of driving, the night was stretching long, and the thought of another hour staring at painted lane markers made my eyelids heavy. The clerk told me the place was nearly vacant. He handed me the key to room 107 and casually mentioned the entire wing was unbooked. The rooms to my left and right, above and below, were all empty. It sounded comforting at first. Silence. Privacy. No one slamming doors or pacing above me. Just an isolated little box to collapse into. But silence has its own presence. In an empty motel, silence feels more like a pressure than an absence. The hall echoed with every step I took, and when I unlocked my door, the creak of the hinges seemed so loud it could wake something that shouldn't be disturbed. The room was standard. Beige wallpaper curling at the corners, carpet matted with years of stains that never fully disappeared, a bed that dipped in the middle like it had been holding the weight of countless strangers. The air smelled faintly of bleach, but underneath that there was something else, something sour and stale, like sweat that had sunk too deep into fabric to ever be cleaned out. I settled in, dropped my bag, kicked off my shoes, and let myself sink into the bed's strange sag. The hum of the air conditioner filled the silence. For a while, I just listened to it, letting the noise lull me into a half-asleep daze. That's when I heard it, a sound from the room next door, room 108. It was faint, so faint I almost convinced myself it was just the pipes, or maybe the air conditioner rattling. But no, it wasn't mechanical. It was too irregular, too human. A shuffle, a drag, the sound of movement across carpet. I remembered what the clerk had said. Every room in this wing was empty. No bookings, no neighbors. I pressed my head against the wall, listening. The wallpaper was cold against my skin. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then a soft knock. Not on my door, but on the other side of the wall. A dull thud, like knuckles tapping slowly, deliberately. I sat up. The air in the room suddenly felt heavy, as if the knock had dislodged something in the atmosphere itself. I tried to shake it off. Old buildings settle. Pipes knock. Wood creaks. That's all it was. I turned on the TV, letting static voices fill the air, and convinced myself to ignore it. But the noises didn't stop. Hours seemed to stretch while I lay in bed, pretending to watch whatever was playing on the screen. Every so often, I'd hear movement from 108. The soft scrape of furniture legs against the floor, the muffled scuff of feet dragging across carpet, the hollow creak of weight shifting on a bed. It was unmistakable. Someone was in there. I stared at the wall for what felt like an eternity, waiting for it to stop. But instead, something new joined the pattern. A low sound. Breathing. Slow, deep inhales followed by long, rattling exhales. The kind of breathing you only hear when you're close. Too close. I pressed my palm flat against the wall. The plaster was cool. I couldn't feel the vibration of anything moving, but the sound remained, steady and rhythmic, like something waiting just inches away from where I lay. The minutes dragged. I tried closing my eyes, telling myself not to care. But no matter how hard I tried, my ears strained toward that wall, toward the breathing, toward the subtle weight of presence I couldn't see. At some point, I must have dozed, though not fully. That half-sleep where the body gives in, but the mind remains wired, alert, aware of every sound. It was in that fragile state that I heard the knock again. This time, it wasn't soft. 3 sharp, deliberate raps against the wall, right at the level of my head. My eyes shot open. The TV's glow painted the room in cold light, flickering shadows against the ceiling. I didn't move, didn't breathe. I just stared at the wall, waiting for the next sound. It came slowly, a dragging, not on the floor this time, but across the wall itself. Fingertips, maybe, nails, tracing a line from one end of the room to the other. The sound was so clear, so precise, that I could follow its path. It stopped near the far corner, and then silence swallowed the room again. The air conditioner hummed. The TV muttered nonsense. But all I could hear was the echo of that dragging sound, seared into my head. I wanted to leave. Every part of me screamed to grab my bag, unlock the door, and vanish into the night. But stepping into that long, empty hallway felt worse. The thought of exposing myself to whatever might be waiting out there stopped me cold. I stayed in bed, eyes open, muscles tense, heart pounding. And then the sound of a door. A latch clicking open. A hinge groaning. Not my door. The one next door. I could almost see it in my mind. Room 108's door opening slowly, spilling darkness into the hallway. I strained to hear footsteps, but none came. Just silence. A silence that felt heavier than any noise. I lay there frozen, staring at the bottom gap of my own door, half expecting to see shadows pass across it. But nothing moved. Nothing came. Eventually, exhaustion must have dragged me under, because when I next opened my eyes, pale morning light was bleeding around the edges of the curtains. The TV was still on, buzzing faintly. For a moment, I thought I'd dreamed it all, until I noticed something. On the wall above the headboard, faint but visible, were 3 smudges. Dark marks, as if someone had pressed their fingers hard against the wallpaper. I touched them. The wallpaper felt damp, sticky. The room next door, room 108, was supposed to be empty. But as I left that morning, bag slung over my shoulder, I glanced at its door. The number plate was gone, just a rectangle of lighter paint where it had once been. The frame was sealed shut with boards from the inside, nailed across in haphazard lines. There hadn't been a guest in 108 for years, but someone or something was still in there, and all night it had been reaching through the walls, reminding me that some rooms never really stay empty. I've spent a lot of nights in motels. Too many, probably. They all blur together after a while. The flickering neon signs, the smell of mildew that never quite leaves the carpeting, the hum of vending machines in lonely hallways. When you've driven enough miles, exhaustion makes you settle for whatever looks open, whatever has a light buzzing against the night. But there was one night, one particular stay I still can't shake. A night that began like all the others, but ended with a detail that refuses to leave me. It wasn't just a strange encounter. It wasn't just a bad feeling. It was something much worse. I had been driving for nearly 12 hours, the kind of drive where you feel like the road has eaten you alive. My eyes burned from headlights stretching across black pavement, and my head felt heavy, as if all the silence of the empty highway had poured into me. It was close to midnight when I pulled off at a small exit, where the gas station looked half abandoned, and the only sign of life was the flickering neon of a roadside motel. The sign said vacancy in half-dead letters. It buzzed and sizzled against the otherwise quiet night. That was good enough for me. The parking lot was nearly empty. Cracks split the asphalt like veins, weeds creeping through the seams. The air smelled of wet earth, though it hadn't rained in hours, and there was something sour lingering beneath it, like spoiled food or stagnant water. The lobby lights glowed faintly behind tinted glass, dim but inviting enough to pull me forward. Inside, the lobby was almost colder than outside, the air conditioner running too strong, making the room smell like old metal and bleach. The carpet beneath my shoes was thin, flattened from years of footsteps, the kind of surface where stains had been cleaned too many times but never quite erased. A pot of artificial flowers drooped in the corner, coated in dust that caught the faint light above. And behind the counter, there was the clerk. He wasn't doing anything when I entered, just standing there, perfectly still. His eyes were already on me before the door closed behind me, and the way he looked, it was as if he had been waiting. The counter between us was low, scratched from decades of keys, coins, and elbows, but the space felt smaller, tighter, as though his presence filled it completely. He didn't look surprised to see me. Not even the faintest flicker of acknowledgement that I was just some stranger off the highway. Instead, his face remained fixed, pale in the fluorescent light, his eyes never moving from mine. He leaned slightly forward, hands resting lightly on the desk, and without a pause, he spoke my name. Not a question, not a guess, just my name, like he had been expecting me, like he already knew me. The sound of it in that silent lobby felt wrong, too heavy. It sat in the air longer than it should have, as though it had been rehearsed. I remember the way the syllables left his mouth, measured, slow, precise. He didn't smile. He didn't frown. He just let the name hang there, like a key turning in a lock I hadn't known was there. I stood frozen, staring back at him, unsure how to process it. My name isn't common. It isn't the kind of name people casually guess. It felt impossible that he had said it by chance. The hum of the air conditioner seemed louder in that moment, rattling in the ceiling, vibrating through the silence. My ears rang slightly, as though I were underwater. I don't remember what my body did, if I nodded, if I blinked, if I shifted. I just remember that I didn't speak. I didn't ask him how he knew. His hand moved slowly toward the key rack behind him. It was an old board with metal hooks, each key attached to a heavy, chipped plastic fob. He didn't check a register. He didn't ask how long I'd be staying. He simply selected one key, as though it had already been decided. The tag swung slightly in his fingers as he placed it on the counter. The number on it was faded. Room 6. The key was cold in my hand, colder than it should have been. I could feel the weight of it pressing into my palm, as though it belonged to me before I even touched it. The clerk's eyes never left me as I picked it up. He didn't move, didn't gesture, didn't say anything else. Just watched me. I backed away from the counter, my footsteps muffled against the tired carpet, and the automatic door whispered open behind me. I didn't look back as I stepped into the night air. The sour smell outside was stronger now, mixed with the dampness of the earth and the faint tang of something metallic. The parking lot stretched out in front of me, empty except for my car and a single rusted truck parked near the far edge. Room 6 was close to the end of the row, its window dark, the curtain drawn tight. The walls were painted a faded beige, chipped in places, and the door's brass number was tarnished, almost unreadable. I slid the key into the lock, feeling it grind against the mechanism before finally clicking open. The smell hit me first. It was the heavy scent of old motel rooms everywhere. Stale smoke, industrial cleaner, faint mildew, but beneath it was something else. Something damp, earthy, almost like soil that had been turned over too many times. The carpet crunched faintly underfoot as I stepped inside, the fibers hardened by years of grime. The room was small, dimly lit by a single lamp with a shade that leaned to one side. The bedspread was patterned in outdated swirls of green and brown, the fabric thin, with threads poking out in spots. The television sat on a low dresser, its screen reflecting only static light from the lamp. I set my bag on the chair by the door and sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress sagged beneath me, springs creaking softly, a hollow sound in the silence. I stared at the ceiling for a while, noticing water stains blooming in irregular shapes, like something had seeped through long ago and never been fixed. And yet, I couldn't stop thinking about the clerk, the way he said my name, the way he watched me, as though I wasn't a stranger at all. My mind replayed the moment over and over, the unnatural certainty in his voice, the absence of hesitation. It gnawed at me in the silence of the room. At some point, I turned off the lamp, letting the room sink into darkness. But the darkness wasn't complete. A faint glow seeped around the edges of the curtains from the buzzing neon sign outside, painting the room in dull, sickly light. I lay back, eyes wide, listening to the hum of the air conditioner in the wall. And then, I thought I heard it. Not the hum, not the creak of settling wood. Something softer. A whisper. Not outside. Not in the hallway. Inside the room. It wasn't words. It was more like the breath of a word that never formed, a hushed exhale brushing the silence. My skin prickled. I held my breath, listening. The whisper came again, faint but steady, as though someone was just beneath the bed, their face pressed to the floorboards, speaking through the thin carpet. I didn't move. Couldn't. The air felt heavier with every passing second. The sour, earthy smell grew sharper, stronger, as though the whisper was carrying it up from the floor. My chest tightened, and I realized I was still holding the key in my hand. I hadn't let go of it. It dug into my skin, grounding me, keeping me tethered. I don't know how long I lay there, frozen in the half-darkness, listening to something that should not have been there. Eventually, exhaustion won. My eyes closed, though uneasily, and I drifted into shallow, restless sleep. When I woke, the room was silent again. The faint light of morning crept through the curtains, casting pale stripes across the bedspread. My bag was still where I left it, the chair still empty, the air conditioner still humming low. But the key was gone. The space on the nightstand where I had said it was empty. The metal weight that had pressed into my palm, that had anchored me through the night, was no longer there. And when I stepped out into the parking lot, there was no clerk behind the counter. The lobby lights were off. The desk was empty. The rack of keys was bare. The building looked abandoned, like it had been for years. It's strange how you don't remember the exact moment you fall asleep, but you'll remember forever the moment you wake up to something wrong. That night, the motel room was steeped in a heavy silence, the kind that pressed down on the walls and clung to the ceiling like a damp layer of fog. The air smelled faintly of mildew and stale detergent, the kind that barely covered years of sweat and cigarette smoke. I remember lying there in that narrow bed, the old comforter scratching at my skin, hearing the low hum of the air conditioning unit in the window. It rattled faintly, exhaling cool, dry air that smelled faintly of dust and rust. I had left the lamp on the nightstand burning, its yellow bulb casting a muted glow across the room. The shadows stretched across the peeling wallpaper, bending and warping as if they had weight of their own. I must have drifted off, though I couldn't tell when exactly. My body slipped under the weight of sleep, and I don't know if I dreamed. All I know is that when I woke, the room felt different. At first, I thought it was the weight, the unmistakable pull of the mattress beneath me, sinking ever so slightly, as though something pressed down near my legs. I lay perfectly still, my mind foggy from sleep, caught between confusion and awareness. My eyes opened just a little, and that's when I saw it. Someone was sitting at the edge of my bed. I didn't see a face. Not right away. All I could make out was the silhouette, framed by the dull lamplight. Shoulders hunched forward, spine curved, the outline of a head bowed low, as if staring at the floor. I could hear nothing, not a breath, not the creak of the springs beneath their weight, not even the shift of fabric. Only the stillness of something that should not have been there. For a moment, I told myself I was still dreaming, that my eyes hadn't adjusted, that the shadows from the lamp had formed into something they weren't. But the longer I stared, the more impossible it was to deny. There was someone sitting there, right on the blanket, their weight pulling the mattress down near my ankles. I could feel it. My body stiffened, but I didn't move. I didn't dare. The silence grew heavier, thick enough to choke on. My ears strained for sound, anything at all, but all I heard was the faint rattle of the old air conditioner. Their head twitched once, sharply, like a marionette string being pulled. The figure didn't rise, didn't turn, just sat there with that subtle, unnatural shift, and I felt something crawl through me. Fear in its purest form, cold and paralyzing. I closed my eyes again. Not tight, not in panic, just enough to make the room look hazy, just enough to fool myself that if I stayed still, maybe it wouldn't notice. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat echoing through my ears. The rhythm felt deafening, too loud, as though it would give me away. The mattress dipped deeper. I felt it shift, like the figure had leaned forward, putting more of its weight closer to me. The blanket tugged faintly, a subtle pull at the fabric brushing against my legs. I didn't breathe. The air grew colder, though the unit in the window hadn't changed its rhythm. The chill crept up through the sheets, sinking into my skin, threading through my bones. The smell in the room shifted, too. It was no longer just stale detergent and mildew. There was something else now. A faint metallic tang, sharp and invasive, like pennies clutched in a sweaty palm. I couldn't tell if seconds or minutes passed. Time bent strangely in that silence, stretching out so long that it felt endless. Then it moved. Not away. Not gone. Just closer. The dip in the mattress slid nearer to my hip, dragging the fabric with it. My entire body screamed to run, to throw the blanket aside and bolt for the door, but I couldn't move. I was frozen under the crushing weight of fear, every nerve locked in place. My eyes, half-lidded, caught the shape of the figure shifting again. Shoulders twitching, head lifting slightly now, slow and unnatural, like something learning how to move. The light from the lamp brushed against part of its face then, just enough to make me regret ever looking. Pale, waxy skin stretched too tightly across bone, the outline of a hollow cheek, and an eye that didn't seem to blink. It wasn't looking at the floor anymore. It was looking at me. The moment my mind registered it, I shut my eyes again. Not slowly this time. Tight, hard, like a child pulling the covers over their head. The darkness behind my eyelids felt safer than that room, but I could still feel it. The weight, the cold, the undeniable presence sitting at the edge of my bed, staring. I wanted so badly to believe it wasn't real, that when I opened my eyes again, the room would be empty, the mattress flat, the air clean of that metallic stench. I told myself not to open them. Not yet. Not until the air shifted back, not until the weight lifted. But it didn't. I don't know how long I lay there, trapped in the silence. The sound of my own heartbeat became unbearable, like a drum inside my skull. I thought I heard the faintest sound then, something soft and damp, like the slow drag of fabric across carpet. My chest tightened. The pressure at the edge of the bed lifted. Relief surged through me, sharp and blinding, but it didn't last. Because then, I felt something else. A weight, not at my legs, not at my hip, but closer. Much closer. The mattress sank again, this time near my side, just inches from where I lay. The smell grew stronger, the copper tang filling my nose, thick enough to taste in the back of my throat. The air against my cheek changed, faint but undeniable. A shift, as though something leaned over me. I couldn't open my eyes. I couldn't face what I knew would be there. Every muscle in my body locked, and I waited, waited for a touch, a whisper, something to mark the end of the silence. But nothing came, only the unbearable stillness of that presence hovering above me. And then, as suddenly as it had started, the pressure vanished. The mattress rose back to its natural shape. The air warmed again, slowly, hesitantly. The metallic smell thinned, as though carried out by some invisible current. When I finally opened my eyes, the room was as it had been. The lamp still glowing, the air conditioner still rattling, the blanket still scratched against my skin. The bed was empty. I didn't move. Not for minutes. Not until the numbness of fear in my body ebbed just enough to let me sit up. My eyes darted around the room, searching every shadow, every corner. Nothing. But the blanket was still pulled, faintly, toward the edge of the bed. And the indentation in the mattress, though small, was still there,